What I wanted to walk through with you is a quick overview. We're going to talk a little bit about game theory, the basics, because I don't know much more than the basics. We're going to talk about something called mutually assured destruction, which is a little bit of a history lesson from our Cold War days. We're going to take a look at the current cyber threats, and our keynote speaker gave us a real good insight into that already. Then we're going to look at something I like to call mutual assured cyber destruction, or MACD. It's kind of a takeoff on the MAD thing under our nuclear days. And then we're going to see if we can take any lessons learned out of what we're talking about and take it back to the office. So that's the plan. What I ask you to do, what I ask you to do is work with me as we go through this, trying to take history, our current situation, and see if there's anything we can do to apply to basically improve the outcome of the future, okay? So think through this with me. So let's get started. Game theory. How many of you have been exposed to game theory? Couple, that's excellent. Did you use it to predict some outcome? Did it work? Were you able, or was it just fun? Anybody who has positive experience using game theory that actually worked? I see no hands. Okay, interesting. Well, I'm going to give you an example of how we think it may have worked in the past. Any experts, any game theory experts to kind of keep me on track? Okay, so maybe I'm the expert. All right, how many of you heard of the term MAD, mutually assured destruction? Okay, I got more, especially the older people like me. Okay, here's game theory. It models conflict and cooperation between rational decision makers. That's key. It assumes non-emotional behavior. If this, then that. It predicts events as people act in their own best interest. I mean, if you raise children, you kind of know how they're going to act because they're in their self-interest, et cetera. And that's kind of the same kind of theory in game theory. So in essence, it's a computer model that considers a lot of options, determines a likely course to try to predict the future. That's in essence, my total understanding of game theory is right there. And we're going to move with that. Anybody know what the most popular game theory exercise is called? Yeah. Excellent. Prisoner's dilemma. When I was looking at game theory and trying to come up with the presentation, every time I'd Google game theory, the prisoner's dilemma came up. When I said other game theory, I couldn't come up with anything. So we're going to focus on prisoner's dilemma. How many of you heard of prisoner's dilemma? Okay, excellent. Anyone recognize the movie that this picture came from? Oh, brother, where art thou? That's right. One of my favorite quirky movies, by the way, if you haven't seen it. Oh, brother, where art thou is this one. Okay, prisoner's dilemma. So we have two people that were picked up on a suspicion of committing a crime, right? They are equally guilty, but the police have no proof of it, okay? They are then whisked away into separate rooms, just like on the TV shows, right? They separate them. I interrogate one, you interrogate the other, and what do they try to do? They try to turn them, right? And they try to say, listen, if you confess first, right, we'll give you a lesser time. If the other guy confesses, that's what happens. So it's a prisoner's dilemma, okay? And if we put numbers to the prisoner's dilemma, and prisoner blue, prisoner red, I tried to stay away from, any politically incorrect prisoners. So I got red and blue. They have two choices. They can be quiet, or they can confess and therefore rat out their partner. And so if you look at the four possibilities there, if they both just be quiet, they have no proof, they're going to go free. If one of them confesses and the other one doesn't, I'm going to wind up with 1 year if I'm the confessor, and the other person is going to get 5 years or a more stiff sentence. So as I'm sitting there thinking this through, I'm thinking, if I'm quiet and he talks, I'm going to get, the worst of the deal, so maybe I should confess. And sure enough, even though they would both be better off if they both were quiet, human nature seems to be, I don't really know what they're going to do. And you see this in Law and Order all the time, right? They both, or one of them at least, confesses. So instead of risking being quiet and getting 5 years, they wind up confessing and they both get 2, even though they both should have been quiet. That's the prisoner's dilemma. And there's multiple different examples of this using different approaches, but it all really boils down to the same thing. So my question is, if red and blue were not just partners, but were related in some fashion, do you think their choice would be different? Brothers and sisters or something. You think so? If the person in the other room is related to you, do you think you have more of a sense of being quiet? Maybe not. Okay, how about this one? What if they were married? I have a feeling that one of them is going to get life in prison, but I don't know which one, but one of them's going up the river. It seems like in this scenario, even though game theory is supposed to be rational, non-emotion decision-making, it seems like emotion does play a big role here. The police act upon your emotion, right? They threaten you, they offer you. It's always a time constraint. And it seems like the more knowledge you have about the other prisoner, or how much you trust the other prisoner, kind of puts you in that comfort zone of being quiet. Think about that. Okay, so that's the basics of game theory and prisoner's dilemma. I want to talk a little bit about MAD, or the mutually assured destruction. Because the theory going into this presentation was, we learned a lot of lessons during the Cold War using MAD. Are there any we can adopt to try to avoid Cybergeddon, like we were trying to avoid Armageddon? And that's what I want to walk us through and see if you come to the same conclusion I did. Okay. After World War II, Russia had this large army. But when we used the atomic bomb, it kind of made it worthless. Okay? Very soon, they got their own atomic bomb, and the Cold War began. Who has the most weapons, et cetera. And we were really struggling as two nations at that point, trying to figure out what's our doctrine and when we would use nuclear weapons, or what would keep us from using nuclear weapons. And so building bomb shelters, if you start Googling that kind of stuff, there were some really crazy things that we were doing in America with homemade bomb shelters, digging them in the basement, things like that. How many of you actually were involved in having a personal bomb shelter? Yeah, me either. I must not be quite old enough for that. But how many of you experienced perhaps school drills when you were told to hide under your desk? Any experience that? I know I did. And it's really interesting how our government, who we trusted, hiding under a desk under a nuclear attack, I guess it gave us a level of comfort to think you could do something. In fact, as I was doing the research for the talk, I started realizing how naive I was, and believing what the government told me, what was going to save me. they had to know full well that that was going to do nothing. So they needed a doctrine. They needed something to, let's say, guide how we were going to use these massive weapons. And really, talk about weapons of mass destruction. Our nuclear arsenal is just that. And the RAND Corporation, one of those Washington think tanks, came up with this idea of mutually assured destruction, and they called it MAD. And MAD was uniquely attributed with preventing the conflicts between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And it really boiled down to this. Game theory was used to help in the Cold War, and it looked like this. So here's the same prisoner's dilemma, right? The U.S. on one side, the Soviet Union on the other. I don't have to walk you through the thought process here, but the zero loss is taking no action, right? Don't launch a first strike. Because mutually assured destruction means whoever launches the first strike, the other party is going to attack in equal or greater force, and your losses are going to be significant as well. Now, I made up the numbers, of course, 80%, 90%, whatever, but these in the hundreds of millions of people on a counterstrike versus the first. So that was the prisoner dilemma game theory used here, that what is the best outcome? No action, right? Don't do anything. How many people know what movie this is from? Anybody? War Games, right? Exactly. The old Whopper, I guess that's what they called it, was working overtime, trying to figure this thing out. And of course, the computer said, what a strange game this is. The only way to win is not to play. What was the computer's name? That's right. Excellent. You guys know your war game movies. Okay. So what is MAD? What was the real doctrine in text? This is it here. We do this, and this is John Kennedy's Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. You probably heard of him. We do this by maintaining a highly reliable ability to inflict unacceptable damage on any single aggressor or combination of aggressors at any time during the course of a nuclear exchange, even if you sneak attack us, even if you strike first. We assure you that you're going to regret it. And of course, we don't really talk about it much, but the Soviet Union had exactly the same doctrine. And we knew they had the same doctrine. And we also knew they had the same capabilities as us. And here in the United States, we did it using this. Anybody know what this is called? Nuclear triad, exactly. So we have the bombers, and we have the land-based ICBMs, and we have the submarine-launched ballistic missiles. So you can see there, it would be very difficult to attack all three of those things simultaneously, so we would not be able to respond. And therefore, the price of attacking us was very high. And the Soviet Union had a very similar setup. Very similar setup. As I was doing the research on this, it brought back a lot of memories because I personally served in SAC, and I served on that airplane. In fact, I found a picture of one of the planes I actually flew on, and we used to call that Balls 47, just so you know. So this is the B-52. This is the H model. Back when I was in the service, and I left the service in 1980, but that machine right there carried 4 nuclear weapons in the front bomb bay and a rotary launcher of 8 nuclear-tipped SRAM missiles. And our job, and it's not classified now, we were on alert 24/7. I was stationed in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Anybody know why the bombers were in North Dakota? because it's very close to the center of the North American landmass. Why would that be important? Because the Russian subs get close to the mainland and we give us maximum alert time, maximum time to get out of there. And that's what, of course, was good about the bombers, being able to go. And also, they were recallable. You know, not like a missile. It's, you know, you're going to have a hard time, although they do have self-destructs, but the bombers could be still controlled. But nonetheless, just so you know, it's 6 crew members on that plane. There are 2 pilots up here. In the back side of the front is an electronic warfare officer, someone who would send out chaff and things like that to try to keep the fighters and things like that off of us. And then the 2 navigators were right here. These things here is an infrared and a black and white television. That was our windows. That's the only window we had, so those navigators. And so we were located right here. Do you notice something? How do you think we ejected out of that airplane? Down. You want to know what was the real mission of this plane? And the time I was on there, we were low altitude terrain following in order to get in under the enemy's radar. So you can imagine that there were certain times when ejecting downward wasn't an optimum deal. So anyway, I gave you too much on that, but I spent quite a few years of my life ready to go to war, and it is an interesting time period. Okay, there are some assumptions that are very important that made MAD work. As I mentioned earlier, it was attributed to saving us from having a nuclear exchange with the Soviets. And number one is, each side has enough weapons to destroy the other. Right? Because you heard it in the news all the time. I mean, how many nukes do you need? You know, how many really do you need? And both governments felt you need enough so that there's no question about the other side being retaliated against. So very important. Each side, if attacked, would retaliate. So there was no question in either side's mind that if you attack me, I'm attacking you. So there's no equivocation. In fact, you know, weakness in that regard was a problem, because if they thought you wouldn't retaliate, then they got more aggressive. And you can kind of see some of that happening today, even though the Cold War is supposedly over. Each side believed that there was no possibility of camouflaging an attack. So it was pretty obvious when attack would take place. Each side believed that there will be no rogue states with nuclear weapons. I think you can see where I'm going with this, right? Because back then, in the 1940s up till early 90s, there were just 2 nuclear powers in the world. There are, I'll mention it later, but anybody want to guess? How many nuclear powers do you think there are in the world? More than 2, right? Definitely more than 2, and probably more than we know of. Each side could not defend against a nuclear attack. I've always wondered, remember when President Reagan was putting in the Star Wars system, or even more recently, talk about putting in missile defense around in Europe? What did that mess up? It messed up one of these assumptions that you can't defend against a nuclear attack. If we start putting in technology that we could defend against a nuclear attack, then the whole MAD principle collapses, right? Because we could do a first strike, defend ourselves, and the whole thing would collapse. That's very key. Each side had to believe that once a retaliatory strike took place, it wasn't going to be recalled, okay? So it's, in other words, you don't get a do-over. That's important. We must have perfect detection equipment. And just another real-life story, I mentioned that we were in Grand Forks. I spent 10 or more days on alert, which means we were restricted to a part of the base where the airplanes were. And there were, I don't know if it's classified, so I won't say, but we had a number of bombers matched up with a number of air refueling tankers, right? And we lived in crew modules right behind these planes. And when the klaxon went off, we had to run, just like in the movies, get into the airplane, fire up the engines, and wait for a message, just like it is in the movies. And you always get one klaxon a shift, a 7-day period. So we all kind of hope it hums early so we can relax, And sure enough, we go on alert on Thursdays, was the changeover time. You hope for your alert over the weekend so you can kind of have a stress-free week. And so we had an alert. I believe it was on a Sunday, which is a little odd. So we ran out to the plane, fired up the engines, the pilot talks to the command center, and they normally say, this is an exercise, resume normal alert. So then we power down the engines, refuel the thing, and we go off about our business. So there's 5 bomber pilots and 5 tanker pilots calling the command center wanting this message. And all we hear is, stand by. And all of our ears perk up, like, this is not normal. Something's not right. And I'll just say to you that it went through everything you see on TV, from giving us a message, the navigator and the electronic warfare officer going through that book and decoding that message. And the message said, taxi to the hold line. And it was like, what? We never taxi these planes. And remember, these are fully loaded with nukes and the whole 9 yards. You don't move them around. And we're taxiing to the hold line. It was the first realization that, you got to be kidding me. This is really going to happen. Now, obviously, the story was that they had detected in Cheyenne Mountain, they had detected a missile launch that had a trajectory heading toward the U.S. But it was a false positive, and it was going someplace else. And everything was then back down, and we resumed normal alert. But I tell you, when you look at your crew members after that, you have a different perspective of what you're really doing. It became real. And so perfect detection equipment is paramount. We must be committed to do this. And each side needs to have perfect attribution. Who's attacking you? And back during the Cold War, it was pretty easy to know who was launching a nuclear weapon. And you can start seeing the parallels I'm going to raise in a few minutes relative to cyber attacks, and especially this point, right? Okay. So, anyone know when the Cold War started and ended? It was after World War II. In the back? Do you remember what year that was? 45, exactly. When did the Cold War end? That's a great guess. 89 is when the wall, right? And Reagan said, take that wall down, and the wall started coming down. But what I've seen in my research, they attribute the end of the Cold War to Mikhail Gorbachev and Reagan's meeting, and that was in 1991, the Cold War ended. Did it? I mean, did the Cold War really end? It just seemed like we don't talk about it as much, right? But we'll see that. Has the risk of nuclear war diminished since 1991? Anybody think that we have less risk of a nuclear event now than before, when it was only the Soviet Union and the US had nukes? Well, obviously. I mean, the news is overwhelming with this stuff, right? To a degree. Has the fear of nuclear war been replaced by worrying about cyber? What do you think? What do you think is more, what are you personally more fearful of? A nuclear exchange or a cyber takedown of the U.S.? Who votes for nuclear? How about cyber? And the rest of you are afraid of both, or you don't have an opinion. That's okay. That works okay. All right. So in 2015, Chapman University did this survey and to determine what Americans are afraid of. Okay? So we're afraid of government corruption. Yeah, I love it. I am too. And look, cyber terrorism is number 2. Okay? Maybe not, Armageddon or Cybergeddon, but nonetheless. And you can see it goes on across to credit card theft and a lot of personal stuff. In 2016, neither nuclear or cyber shows up in our top 10 fears. Now maybe if we ran the same survey today, based on this Korean thing that we have going, maybe nuclear will show up there. But it's interesting that when Americans are asked, we're not worrying about nuclear exchange, we're not worrying about cyber. We're more worried about whether I'm going to have enough money to retire, which is not an insignificant worry. Or affordable health care. And I noticed here, and see if you agree, I look through those and I wonder, yeah, I can see worrying about gun control because that's all the news talks about. The news seems to drive our fears, right? And I know personally when I sit down and I watch the news, I get depressed, but largely I get angry. I get really angry, then I get depressed. And it's because of what I'm hearing on the news. That's what's driving our fears. Why are they not letting us know that we have these other issues that we're dealing with? I'm not sure. Okay. And yet, even though cyber or nuclear is not up here, and yet North Korea is on an inevitable path to nuclear ICBM, which they outwardly say they're going to launch against us. But we're not afraid of it, seems like. And of course, Russia declares our relationship is the worst since the Cold War. But yet, it's not up there. And the Cold War's over now. Not so sure about that. Okay. So, should we fear, do you think we should be fearful of a Cybergeddon, something that really takes down the country? Is that a concern anybody has? Anybody? I got a couple people. Somebody coughing? No? Okay. Well, let's see if we can create an opinion for you. Not for you. Well, you will create your own opinion. That's what I mean. Okay. Well, I think that the number of data breaches that we see on a constant basis, and I have to also disclaim, our company collects this information, okay? So it's like I get depressed because of what we do, But look at this, 2016, all-time record, over 4 billion records. Records means an individual, me, you, over and over again, obviously. And the number of actual data breaches was only slightly less than all-time high at over 4,000. And so far this year, we've got about 1,800 data breaches reported and 5.8 billion records have already been exposed so far this year, and we're not halfway through. And it's already going to be, number 1. So there's something going on here, and it's impacting each of us, for sure. How many of you have any involvement in software vulnerabilities? You know what we're talking about, software vulnerabilities, right? For some of you, maybe it's, when the computer pops up and says, we just installed these updates, that's trying to fix some of these things. But look at the number of software vulnerabilities. And that number is under the light there is 15,600. Just last year. Our database has 157,000 vulnerabilities in it. That dates well before even 2007. And the most startling thing, 1,300 new vulnerabilities we find. And I'm not talking about finding the vulnerabilities. We find the postings of the vulnerabilities, right? And so that means if it's not posted someplace, we're not able to find it, so you know there's even more. So 1,300 vulnerabilities. And the interesting thing is, what caused all those data breaches? Well, the top cause of data breaches is computer hacking for the last 7, 8 years in a row. I think there's a correlation. And our keynote speaker mentioned that quite a bit when he was talking about the human interaction in developing software and errors and all that kind of stuff. Feeds right into this. This is a significant problem we have. Companies, countries, the world for that matter. There's staggering numbers that point, in my opinion, to we got a cyber problem here, big time. 1 million new malware threats every day. NSA experiencing 3 million hacking attempts every day. And I don't think this counts the ones that they're launching, just the ones that are incoming. UK, 230. And of course, the bottom line, Russia tops a list of 100 countries that could launch a cyber attack against us. You see how the dynamic of us against the Russians has changed. 100 companies, of which Russia, China, and others are powerhouses in this area. And of course, I learned a lot this morning in the keynote about WannaCry that I had no clue of. That was impressive. But, it certainly isn't the largest global attack, although it could have been if that guy didn't figure out a way to stop it. But it's the most recent one that, unless I missed something in the news today, but this is some significant happenings here. Have you heard the term fire sale? Yeah? No? No? How many have not heard the term fire sale? Not heard? How about the rest of you? You're not telling me. Okay. Recognize this movie? That's director Bowman. Huh? Do you know him? Right? What movie is he from? Die Hard? Live Free or Die Hard, right? Bruce Willis. And they're in the trailer, right? They're in the trailer. And Matt Farrell, right, says, man, this is a fire sale. And this is right after that montage where they had all the presidents, right? I was going to play that for you, but I was worried about the internet connection. Where all the president says, you are not in control, we have control and all that. And then they say, it's a fire sale. And John McClane goes, what? What are you talking about? And Farrell says, it's a fire sale. And Bowman says, hey, we don't know that yet, right? And some lady says, that's a myth, it can't happen. And Farrell says, really? Please tell me she's not in charge or anything, right? And then you got McClane, what's a fire sale? And Farrell explains it. It's a 3-step systematic attack on our infrastructure, right? And what did they do first? Took out transportation, all the red lights and this and that and airplanes and all that. And then the financial, right? Wall Street's down, banking's down, all that. And then they started whacking on the utilities, right? Gas, electric. Remember they backed up the gas and tried to blow them up, that type of thing. Everything must go that's connected to the internet. And as our keynote speaker said, everything that has electricity is eventually going to be connected. And of course, it's called a fire sale because everything has to go. Now, that was pretty impressive, of where we're standing here today. France, this is a couple slides on just talking about what the countries are doing. France has a 4th army of young hackers on the cyber thing. The UK, of course, and we talked this morning about GDPR, right? So there's importance put onto this. Then we have, of course, our friends in China who completely restructured the military to focus on cyber. And of course, our president just put out an executive order on cyber, and many people say, well, all he's done is created an executive order that Obama already did. So it's not just a Trump thing, it's crossing both party lines. Germany activates a warfare unit, cyber warfare. And interestingly, I like this one. The U.S. Army wants to use vehicles to call in targeted cyber attacks, like calling in artillery, right? I think these vehicles right here were deployed to track down drones and attack drones. But they want to call in cyber attacks like they call in artillery. Okay, do you think a cyber war is in our future? No? A couple? Okay. I kind of think so. Do you think a nuclear retaliation for a cyber attack might be on the plate? I'm thinking so. Can the same game theory used in MAD help us with Cybergeddon? Well, let's take a look at that. Okay. All right, let's look at these assumptions. These assumptions are the ones I went through a minute ago for MAD. Each side has enough weaponry to destroy the other. Not really. If attacked for any reason, we could retaliate. Yeah, we could definitely retaliate. There's no possibility of camouflaging attack. Well, that's certainly not true. Believes no rogue states will pop up. Well, that's not true. How about cannot defend itself against other attacks? Well, that seems to be true. We really don't seem to be able to defend ourselves, and that's anyone, not just the U.S. How about believes that once a strike is, a retaliatory strike can't be stopped? Yeah, we could stop it. Has perfect detection equipment with no false positives. Will demonstrate a commitment to it. Don't see that either. Has the ability for perfect attribution. Good Lord, no. So what do we got? Two out of 9. So I'm trying to create, MAC-D, or MAD-D with MAD, and it ain't working. The assumptions are completely different. This is what the prisoner's dilemma would look like. You got the U.S. on one side, action, first strike, and look at all these superpowers, cyber superpowers. We got, of course, China, Russia, North Korea, and I think that's Iran, if I remember the flags right. And look at all the possible combinations. The poor Whopper, and I couldn't find one, a Whopper on fire, or smoking or something. I thought that thing would be working overtime to figure out what the deal is here. Is there any, and I think I know the answer to this one, any game theory come to mind that would be better than the prisoner's dilemma? I'm thinking there's got to be a video game out there or something that we could use to, imitate this. Okay, assumptions guiding a MAC doctrine. This is what I put forth to you. Cyber war is a game with multiple players making multiple moves, exchanging this and that, right? So it's different than you attack me, I attack you. It's a different mentality. There are 5 superpowers with as many as 100 others that could attack us. The proliferation of cyber weapons is so far impossible to control, right? As we continue to try to control the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and we haven't done a real great job at that either, but cyber, we're never going to control that. All governments are constantly working to improve their capabilities, defensive and offensive. So these are tenets of what's really we're dealing with. All cyber attacks are not acts of war. And of course, the less technological you are, the less vulnerable you are to a retaliation, right? So these guys in this hut aren't worried about you hacking into their utilities. They don't have any, but they're coming at us pretty hard stream. Okay. Next one, assured destruction is not a guarantee, okay? And attribution. could take days, weeks, months. I don't think we've actually attributed the big government OMP attack yet, although we think it's China, or we think this is Russia, we think this is that. It's a very difficult attribution. Like this young fellow looks at it and says, oh yeah, you're telling me WannaCry is this, but not that. Very skeptical. And deterrence is highly dependent on being able to have good attribution. Agree? Okay. So these are some proponents that I would like you to consider. We either our country or big countries, we need to publish what we consider an act of cyber warfare. Because hacking in here and hacking there and getting this, getting that, that's not all warfare, but something, you cross a line, draw the line that warns people, you do this and we're considering it an act of war. And we hear some of that conversation. We need to be recognized as a superpower in cyber. Got to carry that big stick. We've heard that in history, right? And hopefully you never use it. You need to obtain perfect attribution. We need to let them know that we will know if you attack us. And that is tough. We need to publish our retaliatory plan. In other words, define the pain that we're going to put on you based on what you do to us. And by the way, that pain doesn't have to be a digital response. And you've heard it could be sanctions, it could be military force, it could be a lot of things, but you have to be knowledgeable of the pain that you might get if you attack us. And of course, we need to be resilient. We need to be able to withstand attacks. And at the same, and that way it gives them less hope that it will be successful. Therefore, less, opportunity. And perhaps we need to build a global coalition of cyber nations. NATO comes to mind, right? You attack one, you attack all. Or at least maybe the 5 superpowers come up with some rules of the game so that we can squash the other guys. And then, of course, we need to muster some will and actually follow up on it, right? They need to believe that we will do this, okay? And I'm not so sure we're close to that right now. Okay, poll number 5. What type of a cyber attack would you consider an act of war? Breaking into a banking system and stealing a few $1 million, is that an act of war? No? How about the fire sale thing? They shut down all of our transportation. That'd be an act of war, right? Perhaps. The gas and utility thing, the wiping out all the financial markets, they're doing that for an act of war. And I think we need to define that. How about this? Do NATO members have an obligation to support other nations if they're cyber attacked? Any ideas? Somebody say yes? That's right. There was I found in Googling it, there was an article put out, I think, late last year that reaffirms all NATO members and defines they have to put up money, just like they're supposed to do for their conventional forces, to protect each member state. Don't seem to be happening. Do you think a doctrine like this could actually come to pass for cyber? That's a little hard because of the assumptions that have to be done in the technology. But otherwise, we're running amok. Okay, what, if anything, can we do to prevent Cybergeddon? And I have 5 minutes to give you some ideas to take back to your office. Okay, lessons for the office. In looking at the research, they'll basically say a cyber attack has 7 steps. And I think our keynote speaker mentioned this. You recon to try to find something vulnerable, right? You scan it to find a weak point, and then you get access, then you escalate, and then you pull the data out, you try to sustain it, be quietly, and then you assault, and then, of course, the whole idea is number 7, don't leave any tracks that it was you. So these are the 7 steps, and so I have a couple ideas for you to kind of go through here. The first 3 have to do with minimizing the exploitable vulnerabilities, right? Minimize the exploitable vulnerabilities. If you have access to the vulnerabilities impacting your network, you have a fighting chance if you mitigate them, okay? You minimize your attack surface. Perhaps you won't wind up in our reports for data breaches. And you identify, prioritize, mitigate, and repeat over and over again. And I know many of you are in that business, and it is a hard business. And I'll skip through these real fast. And I know the presentation will be online for you later. But the bottom line is, if you're only using CVE, NVD, you're missing a lot of vulnerabilities that you're not mitigating. And many of them are very critical vulnerabilities. Know what your scanning provider is doing for you. And then go on down, and of course, don't forget application. And this comes from a friend of ours, Ed Bayless at Kouns Security, and he basically iterates our business model, to be very honest with you. Okay. The next 4.5 steps here, each step, starting with number 3, requires privileged credentials. You mentioned, again, the keynote speaker. You get in, and then you try to escalate and to get into more and more. Bottom line is, manage your privileged users. That's what this is about. And it gets right down to manage, monitor, audit privileged users. If you don't need to have privileged access, don't have it, because that's who they'll go after, and they'll gain access a lot more. Okay? So I got vulnerabilities, privileged access, and of course, shall we play a game? Okay, and to round it out, prepare by playing some cyber war games. And very similar to what we would do in a disaster recovery exercise, right, where you go through tabletops and things like this. But generally, when we do that, we're very centric to the organization, my data, my this. When it comes to a cyber attack, you may be impacted because they took down the transportation system. They took out AWS, took down another SaaS provider, things that would impact you although you weren't the target. That may create a need for a different response by you and your organization, okay? So that's what this recommendation is about. Look at how else you might be impacted and then tabletop those exercises, okay? And getting all the right people involved so it's not just you, the IT security guy that's running around trying to fix this stuff, okay? All right, these are some objectives, obvious, try to learn from it, et cetera. Some parting bullets for you. Warfare is better understood, or cyber warfare, instead of looking at, playing checkers or Scrabble, maybe we do need to look at Minecraft or Strike Force or something. My grandchildren love Minecraft, and I have to watch them play it once in a while. I have no clue, but it looks very complex. And it looks like you have multiple enemies coming at you and various things. So it might be better to use game theory from Minecraft than it would be from the prisoners. Okay, cyber powers need to adopt a doctrine. We need to adopt and publish a doctrine as a country, as a global nation for that matter, what we will and won't accept. Deterrence is achieved when opposing sides realize they can't really win, right? Strange game, the only way to win is not to play. That's where we got to get to, in my opinion, on cyber. Although prevention is unlikely, we can lessen the severity of the attack, right? In fact, my last presentation at RVAsec was about incident response, and I threw out the thought that we're doing a bad job at preventing attacks. Maybe we should earmark some money in detection and response, right? Because we're doing a bad job at that too. Okay. And while we wait for governments to take action, there are some things we can do, both as organizations, et cetera, and it's a little bit more than hiding under your desk, that the government told us to do on the nuclear exchange. Okay. Or, in my final slide, maybe all this is a bunch of hype, and it's made up by the people who make money off of security, like this fellow Don Ross said about nuclear weapons. All this is a bunch of researchers on both sides fighting over funding, building up the hype so that they can get money for their projects. Maybe that's what this whole cyber thing is. I don't think so. Anyway, with that, I thank you. You were very attentive, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.